All right, let's stay with us now and speak to SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who's live for us in Washington, D.C. Sherwin, good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. Has the president touched down?
He has not, Bongiwe, but we are positioned on the driveway, on the side of the driveway that will lead up to the front entrance of the Ritz-Carlton here in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. So his arrival, we expect within the next hour. He will land at Dulles International Airport, and then he will be escorted here, one imagines, with an entourage, blue lights, if you will, which is a familiar term in South Africa. And then we are hoping to get a doorstop moment. He'll stop and pause and speak to some of the gathered media outside the Ritz-Carlton there here. But certainly just to elaborate on what the president himself talked about in terms of the constituencies that both he and President Donald Trump will be playing to in that meeting on Wednesday. Let's not forget that there are many South Africans that will be on the edges of their seats watching that meeting play out. As you have become accustomed to, Bongiwe, you and myself and many people around the world, the format of these bilateral meetings tends to have a reality TV a slant to it, right? The cameras, the international media are also let into the Oval Office for that sit down around the fireplace in the Oval, and then it's a free for all, if you will. The media can lob questions at both principals, and one imagines that a variety of questions will be directed at the South African president, be that about Afrikaner refugees arriving in the United States, the situation in South Africa vis-a-vis allegations of genocide, and then of course the broader economic relationship that South Africa is certainly very primed for, very invested in here. And so the question, in a sense, Bongiwe, becomes what is the balance between we will not be bullied, and then of course taking into consideration the bigger economic questions here in terms of the economic relationship that South Africa has enjoyed since the promulgation of the African Growth and Opportunity Act some 20 years ago. And what does that economic bilateral relationship look like going forward? Is it a new deal? Is it a continuation of AGOA? These are all the questions that we simply at this point do not know the answer to. I was just talking to a media liaison in the presidency, Bongiwe, asking, can you give us a sense of the program? Is he meeting with members of Congress tomorrow? The response is, we'll wait for them to land and then we'll get clarity.
And of course, Sherwin, from what you say, especially when it comes to that interaction in the Oval Office, the approach of how the questions are answered, as well as, how the answers are then given, and the tone is going to be quite critical to also tell us what kind of meeting this is likely to be.
Right, and what sort of rapport can the president of South Africa strike up with his colleague? They've spoken a number of times on the telephone. President Ramaphosa congratulated Donald Trump after his defeat of Kamala Harris in November's election last year. They talked earlier this year after the executive order was signed by President Trump. Look, I mean, this is a very fraught relationship, and it has been epitomized by that egregious, the executive order about egregious actions by the Republic of South Africa that cut foreign funding, that accused South Africa of human rights violations as it pertained to the Afrikaners in South Africa, created a pathway to refugee status at an expedited rate that refugees around the world are not accustomed to when applying for refugee and resettlement in the United States. So this is a relationship, there's disagreement on foreign policy issues. In the main, Israel's conduct of its military offensive in the Gaza Strip. South Africa, of course, taking Israel to the International Court of Justice that can provide an undergirding of the allegation that South Africa has put forward of genocide in Gaza. But of course, the question then also becomes, what legal basis is there for Donald Trump's allegation against the Republic of South Africa that there is a genocide against white Afrikaners? Normally, this is a rigorous process. I can remind you that most recently, the Biden administration, Antony Blinken was leading the State Department, where they had a legal opinion as to why they believed there was a genocide happening in Western Darfur in the civil war in Sudan. So there are very technical questions that one asks when one lobs accusations of genocide against another country. South Africa is following a legal process. The Trump administration doesn't appear to be doing that. So one imagines that those are some of the uncomfortable questions that will emanate from Donald Trump pointing at various media in the Oval Office, has become his custom. So we also, if we're in the room with them, we have to be ready for the finger point with our question. And so how that plays itself out on live television is going to be an uncomfortable moment, one imagines, for President Ramaphosa, but he's not someone new to this environment. He is well versed on the international stage. He's quite comfortable on the international stage. So the question is, can Donald Trump make it an unflappable moment for President Ramaphosa or not? It remains to be seen.
And especially because when we spoke to the presidency last week, the spokesperson Vincent Makwenya telling us that he is actually quite adept when it comes to dealing with some of the awkward situations and is able to get around them quite quickly. But Sherwin, of course, we are watching this from here in South Africa, wanting to see how all of this is likely to unfold. I wonder, how is business in the US and other players receiving what is going on and also processing the possibility of a meeting that could go either way?
Let me tell you, the arrival of those 59, that first group of Afrikaner, so-called refugees for resettlement in the United States, has lit a fire under US media. You'll recall, Bongiwe, that the executive order was signed on the 7th of February, I believe it was, and South African media were essentially the only groups covering, the processing of that executive order, because US media was so focused on all the other executive orders that pertained more to domestic issues, say, than that issue did. But with them arriving, a few days ago, maybe over a week ago, it has crystallized South Africa's the conversation that is going to be happening on Wednesday, the relationship with South Africa, and a lot of pointed questions from American media as to the veracity of Donald Trump's claims against the Republic of South Africa. And one imagines that there will be a lot of pushback as that meeting plays itself out live on television come Wednesday. So certainly, if you want to be a fly on the wall, I turn on your television, Bongiwe.
They definitely must turn on their television and watch all these developments with you, Sherwin. But also, when you look at, this particular matter of, the Afrikaners who landed last week, we did see the Deputy Secretary speak about the fact that, for them, they are even more willing to give them their personal details to be able to make them comfortable in the US and all of that. What information has been emanating from where you are about where they are now? What updates are available?
Yeah, it's a little difficult for me to tell you exactly where all 59. They're definitely split up. We understand some people are in upstate New York. We understand some people are in Alabama. We've heard that some people are in Washington State, in Montana, and so forth. And so all 59 have gone in different directions and will be accommodated by different NGO groups that help with the resettlement. You'll also be aware that the Episcopal Church of the United States was very firm in their rejection of this notion that there were, these white Afrikaners were being resettled as refugees and refused to assist in that process, but certainly other groups have been availing themselves for that process, but certainly spread out around the country. And whether or not it's been a warm welcome or not, you saw the Deputy Secretary of State, Christopher Landau, meet them at the airport, but I can tell you there's a lot of content on social media from Americans that are not happy and questioning why this process was happening, questioning also why, in the context of a broader refugee program that has been suspended by the Trump administration since the January 20th, the day he took his oath of office to return to the White House, not a single refugee from a different part of the world has been resettled here except Afrikaners. And so certainly a lot of questions around that process moving forward.
And Sherwin, when, of course, we're looking at, that meeting in the Oval Office, there's been a lot of questions as to who might be with, the U.S. president and as well as the South African president. There are, of course, some suggestions that we may see an Elon Musk presence there in that particular, Oval Office. And, of course, all eyes also on the South African delegation as to who is with the South African president.
Yeah, certainly an interesting question as to Elon Musk's presence, his role, his oversized role, one imagines, in the whole South Africa conversation. But let me put that question to Clayton Manela of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. Clayton, thanks for coming over and talking to us. What are your expectations? What does a win look like for the South African government in this context where there's a lot of misinformation, but there are also broader economic interests that are very important to the Republic of South Africa?
I think firstly, the positive thing is that we are here and there's a platform being created to engage. We as South Africa, as you know, we always believe in meaningful dialogue. We've always maintained the principle that political challenges are best resolved through dialogue. So the fact that we have a platform on Wednesday for President Ramaphosa and President Trump to sit in the same room, across the table, and discuss issues is a positive step, because this is an important relationship between the U.S. and South Africa. The U.S. is our second biggest trading partner. We as South Africa run the most powerful economy on the African continent. And if you look at the U.S. strategy, it locates South Africa as strategic to the U.S. for their own interest on the African continent. And of course, the genesis of any relationship in diplomacy is the pursuit of national interest.
I guess the question then becomes, right, what's the balance between the pursuit of that national interest and the notion that we will not be bullied, the misrepresentations that have been made about South Africa? How do you navigate the balance between those two imperatives?
Look, the reality is that because those issues that have been termed misinformation have largely been dealt with. We've got an embassy in Washington, D.C., as you know. They also have an embassy in Pretoria. And there's been a lot of engagement through diplomatic channels to clarify, explain, and contextualize some of these issues that have been in the public domain. So we've moved from there. This meeting is about how do we enhance further this strategic relationship between the two countries to the benefit of the people of the two nations, because this is a mutually beneficial relationship. So we've gone beyond those matters that have been in the public domain. It's about which deal do we close to the benefit of the two nations and the people of the two nations.
Do you know at this point which deal you're about to close? Is AGOA dead? There's a lot of speculation that AGOA might not be renewed. This is a very transactional relationship you hear with the incumbent in the White House. What does that new... Do you have something in your back pocket, Clayson? What's the deal you will be putting on the table? Is it about minerals? Is it about greater investment between the two sides? Where do we go from here?
So interesting that you're talking about minerals. 12 of the most critical minerals that have been identified by the U.S. as being important for their economy are supplied by South Africa. Having said that, we'll leave the matter of which deal, which strategic direction does the meeting take to the president and the 4 ministers that will be supporting him on Wednesday. But for us, it's an important step that there is this platform to engage between the two leaders.
Last question for you. You've often engaged Elon Musk on social media. You've tried to rectify some of the misrepresentations. What does the South African delegation make of Elon Musk's role? Will there be some engagement with him moving forward? Is there a Tesla deal on the table? Is Starlink going to, deal with its 30% concerns? I mean, what does that relationship look like?
You know, the president met him in New York. I know you were there. So the door remains closed for continued engagements. So it won't stop with that meeting. There will certainly be other opportunities to engage with him. He is a South African.
So the door remains open, not closed?
The door remains open, and we'll continue to engage. And even on the matters that he's pursuing from a business point of view, the door remains open to engage.
Clayson Malela, thank you very much. He's got a fancy DDG title, but we'll call him the head of public diplomacy in the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. I tried to get an answer for you on Elon Musk, Bongiwe. I did my best.
Yeah, Sherwin, and I guess it's anybody's guess right now as to who is going to be in that particular Oval Office. And I'm going to catch up with you a little later on to see if, the president, of course, has arrived. And Tembegile, I suppose the big question here tonight, as you and I are going to be having these conversations, is the tone that the meeting is going to actually take the direction and the tone on Wednesday.
It'll also be interesting to see, right, in terms of who controls the room, because President Donald Trump in Washington will be the host. As we know, those conversations at the White House can go anyway, from that rather ill-tempered meeting with Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, not too long ago. We've seen him host, for example, the likes of Emmanuel Macron from France, who also, by the way, disagreed with Trump. But the disagreement, even in their briefing, did not escalate quite to the level that we saw with Zelensky. And Sherwin touched on an interesting issue with Clayson about what is South Africa going to offer Donald Trump, because just last week when he was touring the Gulf, we saw him go first to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, he moved on to Doha in and Qatar, and then ultimately he went on to the UAE. And what those nations did is that they put forward business deals, which Trump appeared taken by. So is that what the South African government will have to do ultimately to maybe guarantee good behavior?
And it's interesting because you talk about this, Tembekile, that Vincent Magwenya last week, when we were asking that very question as to, this is a transactional president that you're going to, what are you offering? He said, the US has what we want and we also have what they want. You listen to what Clayson Munyela had to say. 12 critical minerals that the US is speaking about and as a dire need for them are actually supplied here. So, an interesting time ahead.